This time you sent us down a pretty wild rabbit hole, gotta say.
Mm.
Historical links between Nagaland and China. Yeah, so we've got this article called Was Nagaland Once a Part of China? The Shocking Historical Links.
Catchy title.
Definitely grabs you. And basically our mission, I guess, is to kind of go through it and see what stands out in this whole narrative,
Uh-huh.
connecting these two regions, right? Through like ancient history, the British colonial era, the Naga insurgency, even like present day geopolitics. So
Yeah, it really spans a pretty impressive amount of time and a lot of different kind of historical threads.
it does. So I guess let's just dive right in. What do you think is like the most interesting thing to think about right off the bat?
Well, I think what really grabbed my attention right away is this whole idea of like ancient connections.
Okay.
The article talks about all this trade and cultural exchange going on between like the ancient Naga tribes and, places like China's Yunnan province and the Burmese kingdoms.
Mm-hmm.
And what's really interesting is that apparently a lot of Naga oral traditions
Hmm.
actually speak to this movement across like these borderlands.
So it's not just like an outsider's perspective. It's actually coming from.
Exactly. It's coming from within their own traditions, hinting at this historical interconnectedness that maybe we haven't really explored that much.
So, okay, let's like dig into that a little bit. The article mentions some Chinese texts
Okay.
from like way back the Ming Dynasty, 1368 to 1644, and the Qing Dynasty, 1644 to 1912. They refer to Wild Hill people.
Right.
Could those writings, those texts, actually be about the Nagas? What kind of evidence, might there be to support that?
Well, I mean, one thing we could look at is like linguistic similarities
Mm-hmm.
between like the ancient dialects of that whole region, right? Like if there are overlaps there, that might be a clue.
Yeah.
And then, another thing is we could find comparable trade goods in like archaeological sites, right? On both sides of the current border.
Yeah.
And that would be like a physical link. And even things like shared cultural practices, motifs in art and oral traditions, they can all offer like little clues. It's really about piecing together different types of evidence to see if the picture, starts to make sense.
It's kind of like a historical detective story.
Exactly. It's like a puzzle, and you're
Yeah.
trying to find all the pieces and fit them together to see what image emerges.
And then the article goes on to like the British colonial period, and I think this is where it starts to get really like juicy,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. It definitely takes a turn.
Yeah, it suggests that some of those like early British maps, they actually showed parts of what is now present-day Nagaland as like linked to regions with, significant historical Chinese trade connections.
Right.
And it even goes so far as to ask, like, did the British deliberately obscure these connections just so they could like consolidate their control in India?
Oh, wow.
Which is a really like, interesting angle on how history is written or maybe even how it's unwritten.
Yeah, and it makes you realize that maps are never just neutral, right?
Right.
Like they're not just depictions of geography. They're actually reflecting like the political and economic interests of whoever created them.
Of whoever's in charge, yeah.
Exactly. So examining those early maps, like really understanding, the colonial context, the mindset
Right.
when they were made, I think that's like a key thing if we want to actually evaluate this claim. Were there like shifts in how they mapped the region over time?
Hmm.
Did those shifts coincide with changes in like British policy? There's
Yeah.
a lot to unpack there, I think.
Yeah, and then it gets like even more intriguing when the source dives into the Naga insurgency, like the mid 20th century, and it's like reporting that China was actually providing arms and training to Naga rebels. There's even mentions of like secret meetings and insurgents traveling to China for like military instruction.
Wow.
So like if these historical links we've been talking about are, maybe not as strong as the article suggests.
Right.
Why would China even take an interest in supporting this, like, Naga independence movement?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you look at it through like a geopolitical lens,
Okay.
supporting a separatist movement in, a neighboring country can be a pretty strategic move, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can exert influence, create instability for a regional rival. So even without like super deep historical ties, China might have just seen this as an opportunity, to just kind of advance its own interests.
Playing the long game.
Exactly.
And the article also, like, points out China's stance on Arunachal Pradesh, which it claims is South Tibet.
Right.
But then it's like, why are they so silent on Nagaland?
Interesting, yeah.
And the idea that's put forward is that this silence is actually deliberate. It's like a long-term strategy. Maybe they're thinking they could use Nagaland as leverage against India sometime down the line.
It's like they're playing like four-dimensional chess or something.
Yeah, it's It's some serious geopolitical maneuvering, if you ask me.
Totally. And maintaining that ambiguity, not saying anything for sure, that can be like a really powerful tool
Oh, for sure.
in international relations. Like, by not explicitly making claims on Nagaland, they're keeping their options open, right?
Keeping everyone guessing.
Yeah. They could potentially use this whole thing, in future negotiations or strategic maneuvering with India. You just never know.
You never know. So the article ends by kind of like pondering, whether rising tensions between India and China could actually make Nagaland a future flashpoint, right? And if this like forgotten history of Chinese influence could be like, brought back up to challenge India's control, it really makes you think about how the past can inform the present and the future in like a very real way.
Absolutely. I mean, it raises a fundamental question for everyone listening. Considering this whole perspective that we've been talking about, this idea that there are these historical links between Nagaland and China, what does it actually mean for, like, regional identity? What does it mean for geopolitical stability when you have these different historical narratives that are, like, clashing with present-day strategic interests? It's kind of mind-blowing if you think about it.
It is. It's like, is history, this fixed record, or is it something that's constantly being like interpreted and reinterpreted and even like weaponized to
Right.
shape our world? It's definitely something to like think about long after we're done with this deep dive.
For sure. It's not something that has easy answers, but it's definitely worth grappling with.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
Well, that's about all the time we have for today, but
hmm
definitely a lot to think about.
Yeah, no shortage of food for thought there.
You've given us our homework for the week.
That's right. Keep those brains working.
Exactly.